it's very discouraging. Anyway, that's my story on our present, the condition of our present A&R. Thank you.
Thank you. And, I just want to point out, we weren't about to throw out the boss's dad, but also I think we all heard in your very personal and thoughtfully told story some deep echoes of what John was saying about we may have fewer choices than we think we have. They're fairly narrow, and in fact, in a very different interpretation of what those choices might be. So thank you for that perspective. Yes.
Yeah, I'm Mark Whitworth. I'm from Newark, and I do my best to cheer up Kemp, but sometimes it's hard. I got a couple of questions. One of them relates to the hydro plants on the Connecticut River, and I'm wondering how much of our problems are self-inflicted that arise through things like our financial model. My understanding is that the plants on the Connecticut, the one at the Moore Dam, Comerford, and the other one whose name escapes me at the moment, have a moderate power rating, but they operate very seldom. I think over the course of a year they might operate at 15 or 20% capacity, and I'm not sure how much of that is a result of rules on allowing water to flow, and how much of it is a result of the financial model that they've chosen. My understanding is that they're peaking plants, and they sit there and do nothing until we have a tremendous demand, and then they turn on and get high prices for their power, and then when the price drops, they shut off again. There may be another way to operate that would provide more benefit. And my other question is, I can see you're getting ready to answer the question, and I'm grateful for that. But the other question is, what are we going to be looking at in 10 years in terms of, and I know Ben knows the answer to this, in 10 years, what are we going to be looking at in terms of the efficiency of solar panels, and are there going to be comparable increases in the efficiency of other technologies, like wind, maybe?
Okay, John first.
Okay, quickly on the hydro dams, especially on the Connecticut. You're right. The way those are run, they're called spinning reserves. And the spinning part comes from the turbine inside the dam where the water is funneled through and then turns the thing to generate electricity. Those are, and if you ran the river all the time to generate all the electricity you probably could, you'd dry up the river. So there's a limitation to the use of that you can have. But in fact, they're called spinning reserves. Those guys go out and they look for the bidding process, I think on a daily basis, of what they can get for electricity between the hours of, let's say, 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. And then they make a economic decision to should I commit and bid on the electricity at that rate. And so that's how those dams are generally run. I can't speak to it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But I know I've talked to them before, and that's how they generally operate those dams. So that's a quick answer to that first question. So
Pass it on to Ben, and he'll give a quick answer to the second one.
Okay. The cost of power from solar panels is basically proportional to the cost of the materials, plus the manufacturing cost, and then inversely proportional to the efficiency. So if you can increase the efficiency and keep everything else the same, you can decrease the cost of the panels. Currently today, most photovoltaic panels, crystalline silicon panels, are 13 to 15% efficient at converting sunlight, which is not very good. And what's amazing is how cost effective they actually have become even at that level. If we could just double the efficiency of photovoltaics, we would be, solar would basically, without increasing the rest of the cost, the solar would be dirt cheap today, basically. It would be hyper competitive. There are there are physics results out there suggesting that specially designed solar panels could eventually get up to around 80% efficient. It's theoretically possible. Basically, there's nothing really fundamentally presenting that. There are a number of laboratories out there working. And there's another side to that too. So there's a chance of eventually going to high efficiency. The other side of it is going to thin film, and thin film panels typically have quite low efficiency, around 10%, but there's been some steady progress over the last over the last decade really, at pushing up the efficiency on those from getting down and getting up into the 13 to 15. Some designs got up even around 20%. So my answer to that would be, I would hope in 10 years we're looking at stuff that's more routinely around 20%, and then at some point, unless it's just fine to stick with that and for very cheap thin film panels, hopefully eventually there'll be some breakthrough that will take us way up.
Ben, the other part of the question was what do you anticipate for increasing efficiencies in wind power?
Yeah, wind turbines are already pretty close to their maximum efficiency. There's a hydrodynamic limit of around 59%, and the efficiency of a turbine depends a lot on exactly what the wind speed is, how uniform that speed is. Plus, the turbines have to actually level out and not produce more and more, because if they really follow the wind energy curve, which is the cube of the wind speed, they would be blown apart at very high wind speeds. So they're kind of limited. Wind is tough because they have a very tough environment to survive in. It's a mechanical device and very, very difficult environment, very variable environment. So I don't think they're going to get that much more efficient. The biggest challenge to wind technology is probably just getting the cost down and trying to make them quieter, and also finding ways to maybe avoid avian and avoid birds and bats. And I don't expect much progress on that. The noise from wind turbines has actually gotten worse as they've refined the blade designs and made them more efficient because they couple with the wind energy better, and that coupling tends to actually end up producing more noise, especially low frequency noise.
Thank you, Ben. George, would like to respond quickly to that question.
Yeah, I agree with Ben. The efficiency of wind is not going to increase much. General Electric recently increased the efficiency of its existing installed fleet by changing the software, but that increase was probably about between 5 and 10%, and that's really about as far as they can go. The exciting news is on solar. And basically, a couple of technologies that haven't been mentioned. One of them is IBM has a technology that can be printed on a flexible substrate, and that has already got to about 15% efficiency. And if you think about this in terms of the DOE Sunshot Initiative, which is they're trying to get the price of solar panels down to about $1 a watt. And they're at this point something over double that by 2020. This thing that IBM has done, and it's just an example of many technologies, they can go on be printed in a factory on a standing seam roof, and when that happens, we could be seeing solar incorporated into the roof. There's no reason why the state of Vermont couldn't say we're going to require that all new buildings that can be situated for such have solar panels built onto them. And the amount of solar that you could get out of buildings in Vermont is a really big chunk of the amount of electricity that we need. The efficiency, you've got to remember one thing also about efficiency. It's not just how much power you can get out of what area. It's how much power you can get out of what area at what price. And right now, the price of solar panels is so low that the permitting process is very often in the United States a really big chunk of the whole thing. We can handle that if we can get the politics together. Another thing that's a very big chunk is the mounting system. We can handle that. If we have this on a standing seam roof or any of a variety of other structures, siding, for example, when the price of solar goes so low that the angle to the sun doesn't really matter all that much anymore. You can put it on siding and you can just go with it, and it can be literally ubiquitous. It can be all over the place.
Thank you. Can I, just to make a technical comment on the numbers, I think you were referring to the total installed cost. The total installed cost is a little over $2 typically.
Yeah, that's right.
Depends on the size of the installation. The modules are actually selling downwards at
67 cents.
70 cents.
I've seen them at 50 cents.
Okay.
Which, but I just want to emphasize that's a fifth of what they were, 80% lower than they were 5 years ago,
Yes.
which is amazing.
There have been many hands up, and I want to respond. Okay. Yes, I know. I can see all. I can see you all. We're going to go in this order. You first, please. Yes, you. I'm sorry, I don't know everybody's name. Oh, we'll hear yours, won't we?
Microphone.
Yes, my name is Kathy Nelson. I'm from Brighton. My question is for Annette Smith, please. I'm concerned about the brutal way that people are being treated by developers. Last one, so I can see what I've written down here. My question, and I read some of this today on a blog on the internet. There's an energy and climate buff who has at least 5 different blogs on the internet. This individual is not much of a writer, and his blogs are often limited to biased reporting from various news sources, and to degrading and belittling those who are seeking to protect Vermont's natural resources from environmental destruction promoted by industrial wind scammers. This same blogger also runs a site called the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Weed Folk, a group that's dedicated to the protection of fairies, pixies, elves, leprechauns, and the like. Now, let me finish. The owner of the blog makes this claim. The owner of the blog has written, "It is our belief that a human society can only be healthy if the we folk who live with it are comfortable and happy." Now, this is coming from the same person who calls people like the Therian family in Sheffield and the Nelson family in Lowell, calls them NIMBYs, deniers, whiners, and liars, because they want to live a comfortable and happy life. This blogger seems to expect that he should be respected and admired, but I find it very hard to take this kind of attitude seriously, especially from someone with no education or experience in dealing with these issues firsthand. Annette, I'd like to know how you would respond to that kind of hypocrisy.
That was a question.
Thank you, Kathy. I think what we're hearing in this room tonight reflects the challenges that we're facing in Vermont about finding solutions. Because having been working on this wind issue for 5 years and coming to it from a perspective where we really were making progress in collaborating with businesses and working together, we have approached at least 5 wind developers and said, please do it differently. The first words I ever spoke in public in April 6th in 2009 in Tinmouth, where a wind developer had come to town with a project called Vermont Community Wind Farm, and the phone call I got was, he's calling it community and nobody around here has ever heard of it. I said, would you please work with us on a community-based stakeholder model where the community works with you on the experts to hire, where they have some trust in who's hired and the studies that are done. And at that meeting was the public relations person for OMIA, which is a multinational corporation with whom my organization did really fierce battle for about 8 to 10 years. And I went over to her and I said, what do you think? And she said, he's not getting it. Let's you and me go together, because we had worked with OMIA on a community-based stakeholder process. And we asked him to meet with us together, and he never did. So, for instance, what Kim said, I find enormously depressing, because here we are needing to move forward quickly. And the oxygen that's being taken up by big development, wind development, big solar even, is really holding us back. And these are policies being put in place that are causing our supposed regulatory board, which is supposed to be independent, which I now will and have freely called in public the rubber stamp board. If you want to read a really stunning decision, go to the Public Service Board's website and read their decision on the Charlotte Solar Project, where a very large solar field was proposed on very fine active agricultural soils in a residential area, in an absolutely gorgeous area. And people who participated in the process, who hired lawyers and experts and spent $25,000 or more, said, and their lawyer said in the brief, you should go to the Public Service Board website, read the brief, and then read the decision. In their brief, they said that, you really need to look at the precedent you're setting here. Because if you approve this, then that means that there is no place in Vermont that is safe. And in their decision, and I kind of wish I'd printed it out to read to you, they said that we recognize that this is, we'd rather see them elsewhere. But the legislature has sent us a message that they've increased the standard offer goals to 77 megawatts, and they want it built as quickly as possible, and we're going to keep approving these things. And what does that say to our communities? What does that say to those of us who really want to work with others to move forward? And how do we get through to our politicians who are deaf and not listening? The Terrians have the best example of that. They have letters from, 2 letters from President Obama. They have letters from Senator Sanders. They have letters from Senator Leahy, from a handwritten note from our congressperson, Peter Welch, who wrote, I'm very sorry that you're having so much trouble with the wind project, the neighbors of the Sheffield wind project. But that's a state and local problem. It's not a problem for DC. It is nobody's problem. They have 2 small children, ages 2 and 4. Steve, the father, can't work because he's so sick. The kids are sick. It's nobody's problem. And that, to me, is the sort of the fundamental problem that we have created by this policy that is top-down, driven by ideals that are well-founded but aren't working. And how do we make that change?
It sounds to me as if perhaps we're all the we folk. Now, George wanted to respond to this, and then the next person with a hand up was you.
I feel constrained to respond to this. I started my blog on energy in June of 2012, and I have been trying very hard to be as even-handed as I could possibly be on that and in my other writing. And if I have offended somebody, which I very well may have done, then I apologize for that. And if there is a wrong that has been done, I would very much like to look into it and find out what I have done wrong. The way that I started into this had to do with trying to close down Vermont Yankee, and I'm very sensitive to the fact that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission really kind of has decided that it trumps everything else, including internal policy in Vermont. I am sensitive to, I try to be sensitive to, and I try to I address the unfairness, regardless of where it comes from, of people who are being unfair to each other, regardless of whether it's large wind corporations or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or in some cases individual people. The things that I have been hearing about the Agency of Natural Resources remind me very much of things that I objected to in from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and I would object to the same things. And again, if I have offended somebody or have said something that was wrong, I would very much like to apologize and or investigate what I did. However, I am very proud of the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to We Folk. It is a website which, my energy website has been visited by people from 88 countries. The We Folk website has been visited by 92, from people from 92 countries, despite the fact that it's younger. People like We Folk. I would suggest that you have some fun in your life. The We Folk would probably like that too. Well, you know, I mean, everybody should have fun, don't you think?
Thank you. Thank you, George.
Listen
And
until
let's,
then.
I would also point out that our rules of engagement here are to be respectful to everybody. And so, trying to adhere to what I promised, you're next. Sorry, Ben.
That's right.
Hi, I'm Robin Clark. I'm from Lowell, and not too long ago, a few of us attended a forum in Stowe, and the forum was the VEC CEO, David Hallquist, and he stated that renewables do not work with the current grid, and that they're having a huge problem with the Kingdom Community Wind Project, getting power from that to the grid and to where it needs to be. He stated also that we're wasting way too much emotional energy, excuse the pun, talking about climate change with our electricity, that we really need to be addressing transportation. And I know from a fact, by selling the renewable certificates out of state, those other states really don't care what we're doing to our ridgeline. We have to care. We have to protect what we have. And if you'd like to make a comment, that would be great.
Ben?
So I've been working with utilities pretty closely since about 1998, and for about 10 years worked very closely with utility executives and also renewable energy companies and advocacy groups, legislative groups. And I think this is actually reflective of much of the United States. Industry in the United States will typically say anything that they want that serves their agenda. They will bend things around. Prior to the Kingdom Community Wind Project, David Hallquist was being built. David Hallquist was a big proponent of it because it benefited his utility in terms of some power line agreements, I believe. Now he's sort of saying a lot of stuff about wind. He said a lot of things, and I'll say this publicly, a lot of things about solar, which I think are inaccurate or misleading. But I think this is typical of industry. The renewable energy, I learned early on that the renewable energy industry is often its own worst enemy. I believe the wind industry has lied, frankly, and misled people about avian issues, about noise, about costs, right down the line. And even, I see things in the solar industry too, and I think, and that's right, that we're seeing a lot of poorly cited and sort of ad hoc, jam it down your throat types of large solar projects. And I'm a really strong proponent of solar, and I'm really worried about the ultimate impact of that kind of attitude. We're in a tough place here. The history of this is that electricity used to be generated by large centralized power plants, and it was a boring subject. How many people here over the last 30 years, besides the wind project stuff, more recently, ever went to a utility commissioning hearing? Right? Right? Hardly anyone. This was a boring subject. And so what happened is the industry consolidated control over it, political control over it. And this goes all the way back to the railroads, and they set up a system where they can basically override objections from the public in the name of the public good. And then the state of Vermont, at the behest largely of renewable energy developers and people who had a lot of zeal but maybe not very much knowledge about renewables, took that same structure and turned it to, instead of just building a new power plant once in a while here and there, building a new power line or upgrade, to start pushing dramatic changes to the landscape and dramatic changes to the electricity system. And they took advantage of the fact that the public was largely excluded from the process. And they're trying to hold on to that. And then they have to basically rig things up at the A&R and the PSB to be able to push these things through. And there really is, in the regulations, no real binding environmental controls on this stuff. If the Public Service Board deems that these projects are in the public interest, they can override the stuff. It's not subject to Act 250, it's subject to Section 248. So we're in a real bind here, and I think nothing short of a large public movement to overturn this and create a much more grassroots up kind of system is gonna fix it.
Thank you, Ben. And, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Your name, please?
I'm Don Nelson from Lowell. I was terribly disappointed that Jenny Lyons wasn't here tonight. She promised she was gonna save the Lower Mountain Range 2 or 3 times to me. We put in request for moratoriums, Bobby Starr and I, and another few of the other guys. It never got on the floor. We've complained about all kinds of noise problems. There've been more noise complaints, putting them out there in the Public Service Board, over wind. Milton, Sheffield, Lowell. The Health Department has not done one interview that I know of with any of these people that are complaining. And it goes back to the leadership in the state. When we applied for, when the Catamount Power applied for the CPG in Montpelier, we went to the hearings, every one of them. The first day I knew we'd lost. The head of the Public Service Board said that he was getting his orders from the legislature. He had to follow the legislature's mandates, and you know, if anybody was here on the panel and had any influence at all, get the Health Department to interview the people that are being affected by these projects. That's all I would ask.
Thank you. Any response to that comment, or shall we move on to the next hand that was up? Now, there was one up, yes. Was the response, forgive me, I'm sorry, Annette?
Well, when we first got involved in the wind issue, and this was actually before the Shumlin administration took over, there was a project proposed for Rutland the same size as the Lowell project. And we went with 4 doctors, including the head of the Rutland Regional Medical Center Sleep Clinic, to meet with the health department. And nothing came of it, and then there was, and they asked, for instance, to do health surveys pre-construction and post-construction, so you would have some baseline information. This is a very reasonable thing to do, to go 2 to 3 miles out. When the new administration came in, some of these doctors knew our health commissioner because he came from Rutland. And they talked to him, and he said, I don't want to be the shortest serving health commissioner in the state of Vermont, and I was, you know, this is an important policy goal of the administration, and I won't do anything. And he has kept his word to the detriment of so many people now. So my organization has been tracking the health complaints. We have a site called windreporting.org, and people who want to can, so it's self-reporting, it's in no way comprehensive. But we have reports going out 2.5 miles from all 3 projects. We have reports, numerous reports, especially around the Lowell project. That project, in the estimate of the noise experts that I have talked to, have said there is no way to fix it. They're too big, they're too close together, and the only way to fix it is to take them down.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Pat Hyman. I'm from Barnet. I was interested in what John said about the relative costs of energy between Ohio and here. And I'm interested in that because if it's true for Weidman, it's probably true for a number of others of us. So I'm wondering if you have some idea of why that's the case and if anything can be done about that.
Well, thank you, Pat. Again, I'll harken back to a little more adherence to free market principles would help a lot. We have very, as I said, first of all, our utilities and our governance structure are harken back to the old days where the country was trying to electrify. And when they were trying to electrify, because people had natural monopolies, there was public service boards created. And the public service boards were created in order to make sure that they didn't charge exorbitant rates in that time. So, you know, fast forward, that structure stays in place in a lot of places, including Vermont. Other places it did not. It's been over time, back at the turn of the century, this current century, there was a lot of talk about, well, we need to separate the generators from the transmission guys. And we need to get different bidding on those. So Velco, for example, well, I'll just go on. So you have, what you have is you have this rule by Public Service Board, Public Service Department, in creating the laws of each state. Texas, for example, is gone, and I know that irks people sometimes in Vermont, but they've gone pretty free market. That might be the extreme. California did not. California had tremendous issues.
Tried.
Yeah, they had tremendous issues. However, I'm sure there's some accommodation that can be made. The way the Public Service Board is ruling on their cases, it is legislature directed. And this feed-in tariff of wind, particularly wind, and it's being, by different acts, and I can't remember the numbers now, I always have trouble with that, but the feed-in tariffs have to be so much a percentage of the producers' available electricity for sale in Vermont. So they're required, the producers, Green Mountain Power is an example, they're required to access all available electricity up to that limit of what they're required by the state legislature and declared by the Public Service Board to take very expensive wind and use it in the accumulation of all the power sources that they have to sell. And therefore, it only raises the price compared to the hydro we get out of Quebec, or the dreaded nuclear that some people really don't like, or even the gas generation sites that are there. But all of these feed-in tariffs and the mantra of being 90% green by 2050 is clearly driving electric rates beyond what's competitive. You know, when you have a leader for a group, Vermont is very sincere. The leaders of Vermont are very sincere, trying to be the leader in this direction. But what they're doing is they're marching away from the crowd. The crowd can't follow. And pretty soon we're going to lose contact with them, because you're going to drive out anybody that needs reasonably priced electricity to be able to, at least from the manufacturing environment, to be able to compete on a competitive basis. And I think at the root of it, it's exaggerated. There's a chart I pulled up at one point that showed energy efficiency is another one of my pleas, but they are 1/3 again higher than the second highest of 50 states in cost to us as ratepayers. 1/3 again higher than all the other 49 states.
Who is that?
I think New Jersey was second. This is the energy efficiency charts, but it's one more example of our state managing things in a way that's not productive. And we need to change that. We are the citizens. I think the government's supposed to work for us. And we really ought to think about that.
Thank you. Gil?
Gil-style Reigate. Does the calculus of energy costs include the environmental cost? In other words, is the Ohio power generation, which is cheaper, does that include the cost of acid rains in the Northeast and the destruction of the forest?
Fair question.
Yeah, so, any sort of thoughtful environmentalist will tell you that even if renewable power looks more expensive, if it's truly cleaner, let's assume it's clean, relatively clean, if you factored in the external costs of coal-fired generation into fossil fuel power costs, then you'd have a much more equal playing field. And I personally buy that argument.
It's not just equal.
To me, it's a question of, how do we most economically and environmentally and peacefully move to a cleaner electric system. So what I look at is the relative cost between different sources of cleaner energy. So I tend to be, we may differ on this, I tend to be, a bit on the more radical side, that I believe really it's worth paying more for renewable energy. But I insist that it be well thought out, that it has to be really something that's really going to get there. It can't be just whatever. Even Bill McKibben sort of takes this attitude, well, any and all renewable energy is good. And I think that's crazy. That's like saying, we've got, we have, it's like having a famine and having a little bit of money to spend on food and just randomly spending it on anything. That doesn't make any sense. We're in a super financially constrained position to be able to try to move forward with renewables. We have to spend that money very carefully. If you look at the impact of what we've done, we've signed Vermont ratepayers up for many hundreds of millions of dollars worth of wind generation, which I don't think is going to help move the Northeast anywhere. And the same thing is happening in Maine and Massachusetts and New Hampshire. So imagine if we had spent less than that, but slowly and sustainably ramping up solar generation, building the infrastructure for that, starting to invest in the storage, really figuring out how we were going to move that. Well, the money would have been much, much better spent. And I think that we can probably find common ground on that.
A wise question, Gil. We have another response from Annette.
And in terms of costs, I also think we need to look at the costs and the values that we have that we're not accounting for. For instance, the values of our mountains in terms of addressing climate change, in terms of the fragmentation of habitats. What does it mean to Wilmington, which was terribly flooded by Irene, to have the Deerfield Wind Project built in its headwaters, which is the equivalent of 2 Walmart parking lots up there in terms of impervious surfaces? So we have values that we have not quantified in terms of, what's the value of a bat? What's the value of the birds, the wildlife, and the forests? And so when we look at costs with renewables, what's the value of an agricultural field? We're not assessing those costs and those values, and we're also not doing anything for the neighbors whose property values are declining. And I speak to this with bad solar siting too, that we really need to look at the problems right now and grapple with them and say, what are these costs? And how can we do this in a way that minimizes those costs, maximizes the values that we have?
Thank you, Annette. Now, I'm going to move right to you, because you've had your hand up quite a while. He's got the mic for you right there.
Thank you. I'm John Lewandowski. I live in Newark. I'm a selectman there. My background is I spent almost 3 decades working for a gas and electric company. I worked in fossil fuel powered plants for 11 years. They burned coal, oil, and gas. Number 6 oil, they also had 2 small units that used number 2 fuel oil. Came in after a power failure back in '65, which a lot of people might not remember, but my comment is on something that Annette said. I'm not against you. You said that the Lowell turbines, they said that you can't make them any quieter. They're too big. I went to the Vestas. Those are Vestas V112s. I did a lot of research. I've got probably between 10 and 15,000 pages of research on all kinds, everything to do with the energy, mostly wind. But the Vestas V112s on their own website will tell you that they were never designed to be on land. They were designed for offshore. It also says right on their website that they will not be sold in the United States or Canada. Last time I looked, which hasn't been very recently, but after the Lowell project was in, it still stated that. And I called Vestas. They wouldn't answer my questions. They kept asking me who I was representing. I asked them all kinds of technical questions because I was interested to find out the speeds of the turbines. They like to tell you in RPMs how fast the turbines go. They don't want to tell you that at the tips of those blades that they're close to 200 miles an hour at those speeds, which that's why most birds don't make it through. But I just wanted to make that comment that these were not designed to be on land. The Lowell project is the first project using Vestas V112s in this country.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Please, go ahead.
This is a very interesting, you brought this up, very interesting thing. So I looked at those turbines as well, or those rotors, and the V12s have an oversized rotor for their capacity.
They cover 2.5 acres.
They're very large.
They're twice the
and-
size of Sheffield. Sheffield is 1.24 and Lowell is 2.43 acres.
So those rotors, the size of the rotors on Lowell are what's typically on a 4.5 megawatt turbine. They were marketed by Vestas for lower wind energy sites, and I think what may have happened was, and I'm speculating here, I definitely don't know if this is a fact, but I suspect that Green Mountain Power looked at the output from the Searsburg plant and realized, ooh, maybe the capacity factors aren't so good here. We're going to get burned for that if we do this. We better do this. We use this oversized turbine and try to cheat the capacity factor. And I think that that's what's happened there. The problem with that is correspondingly more noise, correspondingly more a larger area for the intersection of birds and bats, and an extra 20 million, I think, or so in cost, which made the project even more uneconomical. So I actually raised with the Department of Public Service, tried to get a conversation going about this thing. Why are you signing off on this? Aren't you looking at, they're basically changing their permit midstream, and this is a bad thing. This is going to increase the cost and environmental impact. I couldn't even get a straight conversation with them about it. They sort of played dumb about it. And I think that just kind of speaks to the process that we're seeing.
Thank you, Ben. Okay.
I could say more, but let's go on.
Okay, Mark, I know you spoke before, so I'm going to call on the one hand back here, and then if we have a moment, we'll come back to you. We're overtime now, folks, so.
Or overtime? Okay.
We're in the 12th inning.
I'll try to be real quick. I hope this is on point. I'm not sure. And it is a question, and it's not a rhetorical question. The United States Navy has predicted that the North Pole will be completely 100% ice-free in the summertime by 2016. That's the United States Navy has made that prediction. There's also a group of scientists who call themselves the Methane Emergency Group, who are advocating extreme measures, including massive geoengineering to control the imminent runaway global warming. There's also even a single, I believe he's a scientist from Norway. I'm not making this up. His name is Malcolm Light, and he predicts, as a result of global warming, the end of all human life in the Northern Hemisphere by 2031. Now, I don't endorse any of these people. This is not a rhetorical question. My question for each of the panelists, I'm just curious to know how close you think we are to irreversible acceleration of global warming, and how does that impact your views on everything that we have discussed this evening?
It's as if you anticipated the next question and the last question we're going to get to. So. Sorry, your name. We didn't get your name.
Pete Blows, I'm from Barnet.
Thank you. Who wants to go first here, George?
Well, I'll give you my